Welcome back to Capital H. I'm Kyle Forrest, and today we're diving into the role of artificial intelligence in transforming HR through the story of Wisq, an agentic AI platform and the maker of Harper, the world's first AI HR generalist. Joining me is Jim Barnett, co-founder and CEO of Wisq. Jim is a seasoned leader in the HR tech space with a track record of building and scaling successful companies, including co-founding Glint, the employee engagement platform that was acquired by LinkedIn. Now with Wisq, Jim and his team are helping organizations reimagine the role of HR using AI, not to replace people, but to empower them. We'll explore how Wisq got started, what makes Harper different, and why AI can play a defining role in HR's next chapter. Jim, welcome to Capital H. And let's start with, for listeners who may not be familiar with your own story and history, can you share a little bit about your background and what led you into the HR technology space?
Sure. Thanks so much. I'm super excited to be here. I always had a really high passion for building teams, shaping cultures, and building high-performance orgs. It was always the part of being a CEO that I loved the most. And I stumbled into the HR tech space actually accidentally because I had been really passionate about dashboards. And I had this insight one day that I had a dashboard for almost every aspect of my business. I had a marketing dashboard, a sales dashboard, a financial dashboard. But I realized I didn't have a dashboard for what I thought was the most important part of my business, which is the people side of the business. And so that was really the origin story for starting Glint, which was the company I started before Wisq. I had this passion just for, I built a product for myself. I wanted to have a dashboard that told me the health of my team. And of course, that led to the creation of Glint, and Glint's now a part of Microsoft. But that was really what led me into the HR space and shaped my passion for building HR platforms.
Got it. And Jim, sometimes for folks who we've spoken with in the past and for folks who happen to know entrepreneurs, it is that recognition of a gap, right? Or looking at the market and saying, hey, there's something that is not yet delivered. How can I go solve that problem, fill that gap? That becomes the origin story for a number of companies. So obviously, having had that experience getting into the space and where your company had evolved to, what were some of the lessons learned or insights that you carried over from that experience then into the founding of Wisq? Because the HR technology market at large certainly has had a lot of changes over the years, even more so in the last few years. But what were a few of the takeaways that you brought into your new company?
Yeah, well, perhaps the most significant takeaway that shaped the origin story of Wisq was that we spent the bulk of our time working with HR teams to help them improve the engagement levels at their companies, improve the culture of their companies, or monitor the ongoings of their companies. But one of the sort of ironic things that we found was that the HR teams themselves were really stressed and overwhelmed. And I spent a couple of years at LinkedIn after we sold Glint. And as we were leaving LinkedIn, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And one of the things we found that HR teams went from stressed and overwhelmed to being under constant pressure to do more, and then to do more with less. And that realization became an important part of our origin story. What if we could use artificial intelligence and really the new forms of artificial intelligence, not the traditional sort of machine learning that we've had the last 20 years, to create true automation and build a new model for HR teams? And that's what excited us to create Wisq.
That's, Jim, I think an incredible time in the world, right? And not only the world at large, but the world of technology. If you think about the shifts that started beginning at the pandemic into what we see in the market now a few years later, to really dig into the space. And so, Jim, to get a little bit more specific, can you share now for folks what specifically is Wisq focused on today with your clients, and how is Harper, your AI HR generalist, really fitting into that picture to help drive new and different things, not only for HR functions and the professionals within them, but for the broader workforce of the businesses that you all serve?
Yeah, great question. Well, one of the things that we realized was that the previous stage of automation really wasn't automation. Automation 1.0 was really helping companies organize stuff. There was very little automation that was going on. Large ticketing systems, you had 50,000 emails that you were getting a year. And all automation 1.0 really did was sort these tickets so you still now had 50,000 tickets to address instead of 50,000 emails to address. So, that was sort of the fundamental limitation we saw of the existing technology. And the realization we had was that automation 2.0 could actually do the work for teams, not just organize it a little bit better. And so this issue we saw of HR teams having to go from, in the case of HR business partners, supporting 250 or 300 people to supporting 500 or 600 people. And these, what I like to call these so-called inverted pyramids, the model for HR was theoretically an upside-down pyramid in terms of where humans would spend their time. Meaning in tiers, what's traditionally referred to as tier 0 or self-serve, humans were supposed to spend a small percent of their time. Tier 1, more, but also not a significant amount of their time. And tier 1 is sort of the first level of human interaction. Think of it as HR generalists. And that the bulk of HR, the human time, would be in tiers 2 and tier 3, specialist and strategic issues. But what we saw was instead of that inverted pyramid, it was an actual pyramid. That HR teams were stuck doing a lot of repetitive things down in tier 0 and tier 1. And that was really the limitation or the fundamental problem that we saw that we could solve with AI. And that's why we built Wisq. Wisq is, as you said, it's an agentic HR platform that automates HR operations and HR service delivery. And at the center of Wisq is Harper. And Harper's an AI HR generalist. And the best way to think about Harper, really the mindset shift that was so critical during this period, is that think of Harper as a teammate, not another ticketing queue or another chatbot. Harper's actually a teammate that does work for you. So those are the key limitations and the big shift that we saw.
Got it. And Jim, I think one of the things that's important in what you called out is the evolution of technology from kind of traditional automation tools, right? Whether that's a workflow in an HCM or something like a robotics process automation into the ability to actually be a teammate, right? To be able to reason or decide or action or plan, right? Some of those capabilities that are associated with what folks now call agentic AI, right? And so you're getting at this new capability, this new capacity from a technological perspective to then augment the humans, right? As you noted, the ability for a business partner to go from, let's say, 1 to 200 or 300 into 1 to 500, right? Because to a certain extent, the limiting factor for roles has just been the scale of an individual human, right? And so that's a tremendous example that you even just shared around how that could evolve. And so, Jim, can you maybe even share some stories to go a little bit deeper on like how customers are using Harper or kind of Wisq in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about sort of the promise longer term of this new operating model for HR, which we refer to as AI first, but deeply human, we think the potential is that AI can handle 80 to 90% of tier 0 and tier 1, the traditional self-serve and the sort of first line of human interaction with HR. But I think actually the more interesting piece is we think that AI can handle about 50% of all the current tasks that humans are doing in HR. That's sort of the gist of your questions. What are some of the examples of its doing? And if we get a chance, I'd love to talk a little bit more about what we think this AI first deeply human model looks like. So to go into your question about some specific examples, we have one 4,000 person financial technology company that uses Harper to handle all their employee conversations across all of their policies. And they literally have hundreds of policies and thousands of documents that cover those policies. And this helps them not only address all of their inbound requests, but also enhance things like their performance programs, their goal settings, and their feedback systems that they use. Another good example is an 8,000 employee manufacturer. And the one example of this is that we implemented some agentic workflows for them. And for the areas where we implemented agentic workflows, the agentic workflows are directly handling about 50% of all the cases that come in because they're simply not ripe for human interaction. An example of that might be sort of a time and attendance issue. A particular individual was late. Either the manager didn't ask why they were late, it was the first time they were late, or they hadn't received a verbal warning. And so in that case, Harper just advises the person on how to coach the employee or how to give a verbal warning. But when it's right for some type of HR interaction, Harper guides the manager and assists the manager in writing up a workflow. And then HR reviews that workflow and decides whether it's ripe for corrective action, whether they need more information, or whether they decide to close the case. So what happens is Harper directly handles about half of the situations. And of the remaining situations, it reduces the work 40 to 60%, depending upon what the workflow is. So it's a substantial savings of time for the team.
Yeah, I'll just repeat that for folks if they didn't catch it, right? 40 to 60% in time savings, which is tremendous, right? When you think about the other things that people can then take on and do from a capacity perspective, right? Whether that is more time with leaders and managers on their most pressing kind of problems or navigating a situation, or spending time with earlier career workers to help them ramp up faster from an onboarding perspective, learning the company, helping with their career, right? There's so much potential there. And maybe this is the opportunity, Jim, for us to kind of step back and into what you shared around your view around the direction the HR function will head and how HR, through kind of its own transformation and journey and leveraging something like Wisq, can also help play a leadership role within the broader enterprise, right? Because this is a moment in time where AI and automation capabilities are being looked at across every role in the enterprise.
Yeah, totally. Let's start with the model itself. The model that I referred to as a model which is AI first, but also deeply human. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what do I mean by that? If you're AI first, how do you remain deeply human? So as I shared earlier, I think that AI agents are going to be able to do 80 to 90% of tier 0 and tier 1. And by that, I'm referring to self-service, sort of virtual assistants, sort of basic case management, standard requests that come in, et cetera. But I think in some ways, the more interesting thing is that AI is going to be able to play a really important role and handle 40 to 50% of tier 1, 2, and 3 things as well. So what do I mean by that? What's an example of that? Well, I think AI agents are going to become the first contact for HR business partners. They're going to be able to take over the repetitive parts of HR, being an HRBP, some of the business work, performance improvement plans, time and attendance violations, manager changes, those types of things. AI will be able to do some of the first line coaching, not the deeper, more strategic coaching, but some of the first line levels of coaching. How do I have this conversation with my employee? How do I push back with my manager? Those types of coaching examples. AI is going to be able to do performance management guidance and goal setting and coach managers on how to improve their engagement scores. Those are the types of examples where HR can become AI first. But I want to talk about the deeply human piece because that's just as important. So I think what this does, it allows HR to free itself up to be the human part of human resources, to do the strategic coaching, the emotional coaching, the things that require an emotional human connection, to do the strategic things like workforce planning, high risk decisions. That might be exiting an employee, it might be moving an employee, it might be not promoting an employee, even though they thought they were going to be promoted, and how to do that in such a way as to continue to motivate and retain the employee. Much deeper coaching and development work, upskilling, these complex cases that arise. So I believe that there's a huge opportunity for HR to continue to be deeply human and focus on the deeply human pieces, not the repetitive paperwork things.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I love that as the promise and the potential, such a good kind of North Star to anchor on. Because I think with that type of premise, it is something that workers, leaders, managers can see themselves, right? The role that they have to play in the future, right? Focusing on those things that have always been uniquely human around building a community, connecting with each other, learning, growing, innovating, right? And being able to free up time and attention to spend more time focused on those things, right? At Deloitte, a kind of phrase that we've begun using is scaling your human edge, right? Because if you think about what has always happened in these magical moments in organizations, it's been when humans have brought together multiple backgrounds or disciplines to drive a new breakthrough idea. And so the kind of promise and premise of AI and automation being able to get in to allow humans to spend more time on those deeply human things is pretty powerful. And so, Jim, you shared already now the kind of the promise, what the role of HR can look like, how the model. You shared a little bit about some statistics for potential gains that organizations can see. What's some of the feedback you've been hearing directly from your customers about how they've been designing work differently, doing work differently? And then can you give us a little perspective on like what's ahead for the company as well?
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to share both of those. Yeah, one of my favorite quotes actually happened recently when we were sharing Harper with one CHRO, and their comment was that she said, "The moment I realized we could finally escape the administrative prison we've built around ourselves," was when she saw what Harper could do. I think it's a combination of things. It's about having an immediate response. It's about being available 24/7. It's the quality and tone of the response. It's the way it's tailored to the individual in the context of the situation. All of those things lead to a much better employee experience. And so, to your question about like what's on the roadmap, well, we're going to continue to invest in those things, fine tuning our models, deeply embedding our workflows into HR policies and processes, delivering multiple integrations and complex workflows. Those are the types of things that we're going to be investing in over the next year.
Got it. Okay, Jim, as you think about the what's ahead, are there also things that you think finance leaders or IT leaders, some of the cross-functional partners should be getting excited about? Because I know we've talked about the broader business aspect of the AI and automation transformation. I also know that HR leading in the organization on this topic is in partnership. So when you talk to CFOs or CIOs about the power and potential for Wisq and Harper, what's some of the framing you use for them with what's on the roadmap ahead?
Oh, I am so glad you asked that question. I think this is such an important question for HR leaders today. The fundamental questions, which you indirectly asked, is why does HR need its own platform? Why can't a generic AI platform meet the needs of HR? And my response is rooted both in today's world and in history. When SaaS was first evolving, people stood up and said, well, why can't one database handle the needs of all departments? And it turned out it can't. It turns out we actually need Workday and SuccessFactors and Rippling for HR. We need Salesforce or HubSpot for sales. We need Oracle Financials for financials. And so you need systems that are designed to meet the unique needs of your users. And HR has very extensive, very important needs that are highly differentiated. And I think it's really important that HR leaders lead the AI innovation among people and for their organizations. And obviously, it's in close partnership with IT, but I believe that HR needs its own highly specialized system to truly meet the needs of their employees.
Fantastic. Okay, Jim, this has been such a great conversation thus far. Hopefully, folks really take away some insights from the dialogue about what's new and different about the technology that underpins Wisq and Harper for organizations, and the premise and potential of where the HR function can head using a technology like this. So, two parting questions for you. One would be, this AI topic, AI and automation topic, is a lot. It's been a lot for leaders and workers over the last few years, some who maybe just feel like they don't know where to start. So what's a piece of advice you would share for listeners on how to approach the topic with curiosity and confidence?
Yeah, I would say that if you haven't gotten started already, and about 30% of companies have already started down the path of applying AI to HR broadly. But if you haven't gotten started already, I would say a good way to start is by picking a small number, call it 1 to 3 high volume use cases, and implement agentic workflows on those to prove it works and prove value to your team and to your organization. That's a really safe, high value way to get started. The other thing I'd say is you have to have confidence that generic AI systems simply aren't going to deliver for you. They don't have the ability to take downstream autonomous actions. They don't have the guardrails put in place. They don't have complex escalation paths, routing and triage. They're not deeply using policy. They can't follow complex multi-step processes. They don't have an ability to have HR in the loop. There's no continuous learning. We could go on and on and on. So it's very important that A, you move quickly, B, you have an HR-specific application in place, and 3, you get started with a small number of high-volume things that can really, really, really prove value quickly.
Perfect. Those, hopefully folks feel, are actionable, concrete steps that you can take. So, Jim, I just want to say thank you again for joining us, sharing the story behind Wisq, giving people a little bit of additional color on your background, and also your vision for the future of the HR function. I think it's an exciting time at large, and I think it's really exciting to see how technology, how AI can drive real impact when it's designed to work with people, to augment people, not to work around them. And so to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Capital H. We'll be back soon with more conversations at the intersection of work, people, and technology. Jim, thank you again for joining.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, please go to deloitte.com/about.